Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Well, what an interesting weekend, Wendy, don't you think?
Oh, my goodness. Yes. Quite an experience.
Yeah, I would say it's certainly different than any kind of thing we went to before.
Very, very different.
So if you wonder what we're talking about, the topic for today's show is the Paradigm Symposium in Minneapolis, Minnesota that Wendy and I attended this weekend. It's put on by the guys from Intrepid magazine. That's Scotty Roberts, Micah Hanks, and John Ward. And they're kind of the people that spearheaded it. And this is the fourth year they did it. And the first year that we went.
Yeah. And a lot of people that were there had been there the other
each year,
years,
right?
So
and
it's kind of cool.
You could tell that the repeat audience, everybody was really excited about it. But it's a recap of it. So we're going to go over our favorite parts of the Paradigm Symposium today and let you know, if you couldn't be there, the kind of things that you missed.
That's right. Well, first we could set the scene. Describe the actual location where it was held. Mm-hmm. It was at the Paul Revere Masonic Center.
Yes, in St. Louis Park, Minnesota.
Yeah, which is southwest of Minneapolis, or I guess it's in
west.
Minneapolis, but yeah,
west-ish Minneapolis. It's a little kind of
downtown
suburbs. I used to run through it when I was training for my marathons.
Right,
and
the temple, or whatever you want to call it.
Masonic Lodge.
Lodge, that's right.
And I don't know very much about Freemasonry or Masonry or Masonic lodges or anything like that, but it was kind of like walking into the set of like a high school medieval kind of thing. So, I mean, I played the sheriff of Nottingham sophomore year of high school in our school play of Robin Hood. And like the castle walls and the suits of armor and the shields and the flags
and the big wooden thrones they had in there. And
so it just makes me think, like, if you ever were in a community theater production of Camelot.
Yeah, the hallways had normal walls that were painted to look like stones, but in the actual, like, the main, I guess, lecture hall or whatever you want to call it, there were, I don't know if they were fake or real, but they had, stones.
Yeah, they look pretty good.
So it looked like a castle wall, and then they had the wooden chairs and everything with, like you were saying, with the shields. So it really was quite a unique setting.
It was nice. It was fun. I can see why people would want to go there to meet up, to have like secret rituals and stuff like that.
Or for paranormal symposium stuff.
Yes. So that was a treat. And so, I mean, first of all, you set the scene with that kind of place. So it's like you're walking, you see the suit of armor.
Yeah, it's a neat environment.
You're walking into the Masonic Lodge. And I guess I've been to the Masonic Temple in Madison too.
Oh, right.
And I did a thing. They were looking at maybe doing a tour. And so since the tourism is one of the things that I'm interested in,
tour guy.
And writing tours, that was something we discussed, was writing a tour of that. And I was surprised how open the Masons were.
Oh, about their rituals and things like that.
Like, because I mean, if you watched any kind of documentary on cable in the 90s, or when that Angels and Demons, or what was the Da Vinci Code?
Oh, right.
Out,
yep.
It just makes it sound like the Masons, like, they're some secret society.
Yeah, no one knows anything about them unless you're a member.
Right. And really, it's just like a bunch of guys that like to do charity, and that seems nice, I think, in most of the things. And so they're just like, well, we can't give you the actual rituals for the tour, but we can talk about what Masonry is and everything. And it's all very theatrical.
Oh,
so
okay.
So they have, like, at least the Madison Masonic Lodge, Masonic Temple, not just a lodge. At the temple, they will have a big stage, and where people have weddings and things like that. So they'll rent it out for weddings and events. But the big stages have a bunch of scrims and backdrops and stuff. And it's all taken from biblical stories and things like that. So like a big fiery backdrop. I mean, it's like a stage like you would have in an auditorium where people put on a play. So that's kind of when we're comparing the Masonic Lodge to the set of a play. That's for the rituals, or when people get to like the 33rd... What do they call it? The level. Yeah, when you level up. It's like in Dungeons and Dragons, when you get enough experience points, you get to level up. No, the Masons have degrees.
Yes. And they had various wall hangings describing these things.
Talking about the degrees and just like the artwork and everything. Yeah. And so, I mean, you realize people do spend a considerable amount of their lives doing this thing and talking about it and stuff. And it's interesting. And not knowing too much about it, but then being introduced to it in Madison and realizing that it seems like it's just a real theatrical thing of people who are using symbolism and ritual to kind of connect with each other on a different level. Yeah. And nobody's like plotting the overthrow of the planet. At least maybe that's
That
what
we know of.
That could have been the disinformation they gave to me. Like, well, we don't have any secrets. Everything's fine. There's no plan to take over the planet.
There might be that might be part of the secret. Like you have to get to a certain level before you learn those things.
Right. Kind of like if you're a Scientologist, when you become operating
Right.
Thetan level 4,
Yeah.
they finally tell you about the volcanoes and aliens and stuff like
exactly.
that. And that's, man, Scientology is so much fun. I can't wait to do a full episode
gosh.
on Scientology and go into it. And a full episode on Masonry too. Like once we learn a little more, we can delve into behind the scenes and Masonic stuff. But kind of got a crash course in it this weekend at the lodge.
So they had the lodge. So you entered, and then if you went off to the right, it would lead to the main lecture room where all the presenters were giving their talks. And then if you went to the left, you went to the vendor room where, people were selling their books and
magic amulets
Yeah,
and things
yeah,
like that.
exactly.
Or just, it was like going into a cult shop or something. You
like
just
a
walk
mystic
in.
shop or whatever.
Here's some crystals. Here's some, and some neat artwork.
It's pretty cool.
And everything's a lot of
lots
skulls.
books. Oh yeah, lots of skulls, lots of books.
And the speakers were selling their
Incense.
cool books there. And so that was I loved seeing what people had to sell and the cool books that the speakers had.
Yeah, very cool.
And, I think there's a whole bunch of reading, like assigned reading. I feel like we went to the lectures and now we have to do the follow-up reading to completely understand it.
Most of these presenters have done extensive research. And so, you see their presentation and you go, wow, there's a lot more to this. I really want to find out more. So it's a good little ad.
Right. So we set the stage of the Masonic Lodge.
Yes.
And so it's in there. It's a cool place. It's interesting. It's different than, your basic kind of convention hall or hotel.
Absolutely, for sure.
I thought that was fun too. Because,
Yeah.
we're used to conferences at a hotel. You have the same kind of thing. And so this is like, okay.
A very memorable kind of setting.
Yes.
And the Milwaukee Paranormal one was like that too at the Irish Cultural Center.
Yeah, I
it had
agree.
a very unique, special kind of feel to it.
Yeah, the Irish Cultural Center even had the feeling of like the main presentations done in kind of a church.
Yeah.
It felt like it was done in a church,
Yeah.
and considering that Martin Luther King had once preached there, spoken
go.
there, that I guess that
pretty
had
cool.
that kind of effect. Okay, so we get there and everybody's like, oh, what did you see? All right, well, first of all, it kind of stuck with what the definition of a symposium is, which is people kind of giving lectures.
Yeah. And they had it so that each day, they kind of had a theme for each day.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it felt like that anyway. They're not a strict theme, but they had the first day, which was Thursday.
Yes, Thursday. So we got there, we roll in, we leave Madison at 9:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
And we headed straight there, drove straight there. I didn't even go to the bathroom.
Yeah, we really hauled.
Yeah, we're like, let's get there. Okay. And so the keynote speaker was a guy named Lon Milo Duquette. Mm-hmm. And he was an interesting guy. I liked it in the beginning because he opened with a little acoustic guitar.
Yeah,
and
he played a little
song.
song. That was
and
cool.
if you go to his Wikipedia page, and we'll have this linked in the show notes, othersidepodcast.com/92. 92.
That's a good year.
Yeah. So he was an aspiring musician for a long time in the 70s, and he actually released an album on Epic Records.
Wow.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
Charlie D and Milo was the name of the band.
Okay.
And so kind of country, kind of folky. I guess they played with Hoyt Axton, who was, not a big country guy, but country people know him, and you probably know him, Wendy, best, as he was the dad in Gremlins.
Oh, well, yeah, of course.
Okay. So he was also a songwriter. He wrote Jeremiah Was a Bullfrog and a good friend of mine.
Wow, that's a very
It's a big song. So
well-known
Hoyt Axton.
song.
Yeah, and he was the dad in Gremlins. And Arlo
knew?
Arlo Guthrie, a famous folk artist, and they even played
yeah.
with Sammy Davis Jr.
Wow.
one time, man.
Had no idea.
Right. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, me too.
Anyway, so in the 70s, though, he decided to quit music and become like a follower of one of the favorite people on our program,
Yes.
Alistair Crowley.
That's
Holy
right.
moly, it's Alistair
Right.
Crowley.
Brought it right up, and we both got really excited when he said that.
Alistair Crowley.
And especially when he started off by saying, he's a master magician or something. Practicer of magic. I don't know.
Right. Magician, not a magician in the Houdini
Yeah,
sense, but like a magician and performs rituals in
Yeah.
the hope of things happen.
Not like David Copperfield or something, but
Right. But he was a governing officer of the Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO, which that was the organization, the Hermetic Order and things, Alistair Crowley's magical organization. And so, of course, I wanted to know, is he conjuring up demons?
Yeah.
Is he, what's he going to do? And really, he kind of laid it out that magic was a form of self-improvement
Yes.
based on, thinking and
believing in the things that you focus on.
Your capabilities and
Yeah.
you know, not limiting yourself and using the rituals as a form of that. And not that if you say the magic words 10 times, then, you know, something's going to come down and, you know,
Make something magical happen. Like,
right. Like he said that the magic he discovered, he's like, well, I discovered that if I wanted to make more money, I had to work harder. And then if I wanted to have more lovers, I had to become a lot more charming. And you're like, well, all right.
Okay,
I guess,
then.
you know, I guess it kind of says that the leading guy from the OTO, or that could be disinformation too. But if the leading guy from the OTO tells you that really the magic spell is working out.
yeah.
I was like, the magic spell.
I'd feel ripped off.
Right. You want to attract people. The magic spell is going to the gym and eating right. Okay. And what's the magic spell for getting riches? It's like,
Right.
well, working hard, finding a business. And you're like, okay. But that was kind of good to know. And I love the idea too that, you know, people think of the symbols of Aleister Crowley, the most wicked man in the world, and everything, and the 666 and the demons and okay, you're using rituals to kind of put yourself in that mindset, to give yourself that kind of belief.
I like that too, because it made it feel like it's possible for anyone to make anything happen, you know? So it's like, oh, okay, this is more of a, I don't know, not Tony Robbins, but more of a mind exercise than...
And it also doesn't seem like BS.
Right.
Which is what a lot of things when people like, when you say the magic, and only if you believe hard enough, you know, then you'll become a real boy.
It's a secret.
So I appreciated that. But it was an interesting, and a lot of his focus was on the development of Freemasonry from the Knights Templar.
Yeah.
So he was kind of going into that, the history of the Knights Templar, and how maybe their secret, that why they got free reign of Jerusalem, and then maybe why they were executed in the end, was that they knew that some of the biblical stories weren't real.
Yeah, and his whole talk really focused on that.
How maybe...
The evidence that he thought was compelling enough to believe that.
Right, that Solomon and David weren't real people, that maybe the Exodus wasn't real, that it, you know, and like, okay, and so they come there, and all these biblical stories in the Knights Templar are like, hey, we were at the site of the temple, and there's nothing, like we couldn't find anything and everything. And so the church is like, hey, you guys can do what you want because we don't want this to get out because we're using religion as a form of social control.
Yes, exactly.
And then eventually when the church gets sick of the Knights Templar, they execute their main guy on Friday the 13th, and the Knights Templar goes underground and becomes the Freemasons, and that's pretty much his story.
Yeah, and there was a lot of talk about that throughout the weekend, actually.
Well, we were at the Masonic Lodge, so the people are going to be...
Well, right, but I mean, the symposium, the fact that it was held there was not necessarily because of that.
Had to do with it.
Yeah, it was a topic that was covered very thoroughly.
So that was the keynote, and Lon-Milo Duquette was there the whole weekend, and we had a chance to talk to him and stuff, and he was a nice guy. Just an interesting, nice guy, kind of charming, grandfatherly Sean Connery looking kind of guy.
Yeah,
like
Sean, a description.
Yeah, you know, with the gray hair, like the real white hair, beard.
Yeah.
And like Sean Connery when he used to wear the toque.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Because, I mean, Sean Connery, you know, he was bald pretty early, so he was wearing the toque, and then like... So think Hunt for Red October, Sean Connery.
Right, yeah, I could see that.
Is
for
what
sure.
you think.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, he was there the whole weekend, and so were almost all of the speakers. So it was pretty cool because in between the different presentations, when we'd go on break and stuff, those guys would be just hanging out in the lounge area, you know, having a snack or whatever. And so you could chat with them, you could ask them questions, and it was wonderful to be able to have that access to those people.
And, you know, I would say that really did set it apart.
It did.
From other things.
Yes.
I mean, at the other stuff, you could go up to the booth and talk to the people, but I think there was less socializing at some of the other conventions.
I agree.
And, like, everybody was really just hanging out all day.
And they were nice.
Like nobody was unwilling. Like everybody was really into it. So you'd expect the people to be like, look, if you want to hear about this, then just listen to my presentation and
ask
read
a question at the end.
Right. Read my book, you jerk.
Oh, and the other thing was the Q&As, like, no question went unanswered, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes they have to cut them off, but they just let things roll.
They let the time go.
Everybody,
right. And then
everybody got their questions.
And if you thought of a question later, you could go up and actually be like, hey, dude.
Exactly.
And then just be like, yeah. And sometimes I was just shocked the availability and openness of everybody. I really thought that was a delight.
That was awesome.
So 2:30 p.m. on Thursday, John Ward did an archaeological presentation on the new discoveries at, I don't know, I'm saying it right, Gebel El Sisila in Egypt.
Right.
And so that was a real academic one.
That was, yeah. They've been apparently doing research there for quite a while, and it's uncovering some really cool things.
Yeah, and that was on the science side. It was just interesting to think of, like, this time in Egyptian history, and it really was like, so he's doing real archaeological research.
Yeah, he's opening tombs that haven't been, seen by human eyes since they were sealed,
right?
That type of thing. So it's like Indiana Jones stuff.
Yeah, so that was I thought that was a good and interesting one. That was
very
real, that was one where you had to be really like, I'd say there was a good portion of it that was above my head.
Yeah, me too.
And I'd taken some archaeology classes and stuff. I'm still like, oh man, like, this is an academic. Like, this guy's, I'm getting like half of it, and the rest of it, I'm just like, okay. And he's got, it's like a smooth British, like, hello.
Oh yeah.
And he looks like a younger John Hurt, the actor. The guy in Alien, the alien bursts out of his chest. He played the war doctor in Day of the Doctor. You'd recognize him if you see him, but he really reminded me of John Hurt, the actor. So I want you guys to picture, because John Hurt didn't have a goatee when he was younger.
Okay.
But I want you guys to picture the actor, John Hurt, with the goatee that he has now, but looking about 25 to 30 years younger. And so that's kind of John Ward's speech. I was just like, oh, it's John. He's got that smooth British accent. Hello. That obviously is a joke accent of mine. But
they go to Egypt all the time, so they are just experts in the whole Egyptian archaeology thing. So that was just cool to hear about, because it really was like Indiana Jones, it's like, hey, professor.
Right. So when we do our, it just like Indiana Jones. Remember Indiana Jones when the girl closes her eyes and she's got love you on the eyelids? Right. That's what I was expecting to see. So that was good. And I think he's the kind of person. So we did the Gods of Egypt episode a couple months ago when that movie came out. And I think that we'll have to bring him on to have like an Egypt 201.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
Story,
he could definitely
fill in the blanks for us. So let's say if you were into Egyptian stuff, let's go to the next level. And here's something that you're not going to get if you just watch the History Channel.
Yeah, I'd love for us to talk to him.
Yep. And so he was entertaining, nice guy, young John Hurt. And then next up was Dr. Rita Louise on Thursday. Right.
Yep.
And she was, she had some points that I thought were kind of interesting.
Yeah.
She goes, so while Dr. Ward's presentation was very academic, her presentation all of a sudden is like ancient aliens. Like here's the academic side and here's left field. And she came flying in on a left field. And so she would talk about genetic engineering in antiquity. And so her story was basically talking about, she thinks that the human race is much older than it actually is.
Uh-huh.
And that there's certain like milestones in human history where the genetic code was changed. And right. And who changed that genetic code? So that was that was fun.
That was cool. Yeah, it started venturing in the UFO direction, which
is always
got exciting.
It's always a good part. So Dr. Rita Louise, and she was interesting because, she just spoke very factually. She's like, okay, and then she would talk about genes and things. And another thing where it went a little bit over my head, because it's like, okay, now we're talking about like specifically named genes introduced at a certain point in human history.
Right.
And this is where agriculture happened, and this is when we stopped being hunter-gatherers, and this is went from Australopithecus to Homo erectus to blah, blah, blah. What's the answer? Aliens.
Yeah. And it's important to note that all of the presenters, I felt, were just very good investigators of their topics and very, very thorough on things. And they didn't report it in a sensationalist way at all. Like, it was just kind of, okay, here's a fact, here's a fact, here's a fact, here's a fact. We might be able to guess that these facts are all lined up this way because, and so it's just, they presented things in a real compelling, believable way. So I appreciated that. And
I did too. And I thought that there was nothing sensationalist as I expected. And usually at these things, you're going to get somebody that's going to say something that you're like, I completely disagree with that.
Off the wall,
like you are saying something that makes us all look bad for even being here. And I think everybody really kept it pretty sharp. And I appreciated that.
Definitely.
That everybody was super smart. Super smart. You can tell they were super smart, and I am obviously not. So those are the speakers we saw on the first day.
That's right.
And had some fun Thursday.
Yes.
And then Friday we went back. The first speaker we saw on Friday, I had to take care of some business in the morning, so we got there a little after lunch. was Rocky Stucci.
Yes.
And he's friends with the guys who are the organizers, Scotty Roberts and John Ward. And so he had done some ghost research with them.
Right.
And so
but he's actually like a political radio personality, right?
Yeah. So he's like a Minnesota political radio personality.
He's got the Rocky Stucci show or whatever.
Yeah. And they played the Godfather entrance theme,
Yeah.
and he's got that Italian kind of
And a very dynamic speaker.
presentation. Yeah. I would say he came out guns blazing.
Yeah, he did.
Be a good way to talk about him. But I thought the most interesting part of his speech is when he did EVP, a little EVP analysis.
Oh my gosh, that was cool.
And I mean, it was a really good EVP because a lot of EVPs you listen to and you're like, okay, you know what? Could be anything.
Right,
Like I think
exactly.
somebody farted and now you're calling that an EVP.
Yeah, it'll be like, hey, listen to this. And it's like, it totally said, Mike, I'm coming to get you.
Right. And it's like that was my stomach growling, guys. Like that wasn't, there's aliens in my stomach. There's ghosts in my stomach that are mad that I haven't fed it enough. But no, it was like a loud bang. When they were alone in a house and there was nothing there to fall or anything.
my
Like
gosh.
a loud bang. And then they all leave the room and there's a microphone left there. And there's this,
Oh yeah, it's so scary.
and it says, welcome.
Yeah, just clear as could be.
And you're like, what?
Oh man.
Like who said that? The thing is, they weren't even by the microphone.
Yeah.
And so they run upstairs. To
And you
see
can
what the
hear
loud
everybody
bang is.
running and like swearing because they're freaking out.
Yeah, they're pooping their pants a little bit. Like, they're like, oh God. You know, people they're terrified and everything because they hear this loud
Yeah.
crash and they go check it out and they run up the stairs
God,
and you
the voice.
hear everybody leaving.
Yeah, it sounds like a dog panting almost.
Right.
And then it's just like, welcome.
Oh, I got goose pimples just hearing that story.
I have it right now just thinking about it.
So that to me was an exciting, like if I got an EVP
Yeah.
like that, I'd be talking about it all the
Yeah,
time.
that was
like I
really
would go
cool.
to conferences and be like, check this out. Like we have no idea what this is. Why is this on the tape? I don't know.
And when he described it, I expected it to be a lot of times with the EVPs, you really have to strain to hear it. And so I was expecting to not hear it the first time through,
Like,
but it was just
wow.
complete. I mean, it sounded like a person just
going,
welcome straight up to the mic.
Right. And a lot of times it's like, it'd be like, oh, you hear the breathing? And it's like,
Right. Or yeah, it's just like audio,
you know, and it's audio junk or it sounds
Yeah.
like the
static or something.
the furnace or something like that. And it's like, oh, well,
No, this was like,
it's like somebody standing in front of the microphone and panting like
Like a
we
dog.
are right.
A
like
dog
we
was
are right
running.
now.
Yeah.
And the welcome too, I expected to be like, welcome.
I thought it was going to be like,
And they're
You
like,
know.
you heard that, right? That's welcome.
welcome.
You heard that welcome, right? And you're like, what? No, I didn't hear that. And then you don't hear it until they, but it was a great, so that was the highlight of his presentation.
Yeah, that was
for me.
cool.
Anyway, he's got an interesting show and they have a network and they talk about political topics and things like that.
Yeah, and he's
So-
got an interesting story about, he's, I guess, had some addiction issues and things like that. So he sounded like a very interesting kind of,
a former addict and biker kind
success
of thing.
story.
And I didn't realize that bikers were actually a gang. Like, no, until a few weeks ago, I was
Some of them.
Right. I know that most bikers are not. Like, most bikers are just guys that ride Harleys. But biker gangs, when I thought of them, I'm like, why do people just don't like biker gangs? They're just people that like riding around, listening to classic rock. And I didn't realize that the Hells Angels and the Outlaws and stuff, because I've gone to perform music somewhere and like some of the audience was like affiliated.
Yeah.
Or whatever
Oh, yeah.
with the biker gang. And I'm like, oh, they're affiliated. That just means they like to ride, right?
A lot of times they'll be the security people too.
Right, but I didn't realize that for these main branches of biker gangs, they run drugs and prostitution rings, and then if you're affiliated, that means that when the Hells Angels or Outlaws or whatever come into town, like you have to do their bidding.
Whoa.
Like they're like they come into town and you got to help them out. You're affiliated, which means you get protection from them if you need it or money. Anyway, biker culture. I really thought it was just about biking. Until I was 30,
Right, it's not just recreation, Mike.
until I was 39 years old. I'm like, oh, that's neat. They get to wear the jackets and everything like that. Wouldn't it be fun? I read Zen on the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I'd love to have that trip across the country.
Yeah.
That sounds great. And no, it's violence and drugs. Okay, so I think that's what he was associated with because he was talking about
Right, yeah.
that.
Yeah.
One of the largest criminal organizations in the United States.
Yeah.
And before, I would not known who that was.
Well, and I mean, I thought he was making some references to the mob
mafia?
as well. Yeah.
Well, right, because he does the Godfather intro.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, listen to.
Subtle.
I'm sure he'll talk
Very
about this
subtle.
more on his show, the Rocky Stucci Show, and I hope he.
But yeah, he was good.
And I've listened to his radio stuff, and the political talk usually isn't my thing. But when he talks about paranormal, he's a dynamic and interesting speaker.
Cool.
Up next was another character. That first of all, this guy's name is great.
Yes.
Start up. Laird Scranton.
Yes.
He was discussing, like, it was straight up, like geology, archaeology kind of thing too.
Very cool stuff.
Saying that he was comparing the dwellings of this tribe in Africa, the Dogon tribe, who we've talked about in the show before, to the dwellings in the houses of this place called Skara Brae.
I love that name too.
Skara Brae.
It sounds badass.
It does. And Skara Brae, which is in the Orkney Islands off of Scotland. So he was, like kind of making the connections between the Egyptians, the Orkney, this Skara Brae settlement, and also the Dogon tribe in Africa. And I think the points were interesting because he was kind of saying that Skara Brae was a site of ancient knowledge. Like he would think of it like like he was describing it like a university.
Yeah. Like they would learn agricultural techniques and things there.
And so agriculture was sacred to these people.
Yeah.
And so these were like sacred secrets, and you would go there and learn them and then go back to your place. And then that's how you learn to plant and learn how to reap. And when you really think about agriculture, it's a big change.
And as cultures grow and you need it to survive, to make it through. So it makes sense that it would be a sacred thing that you would want to protect that knowledge. And
that they would treat it as like a mystery and kind of thing. And I always, whenever we talk about the Dogon tribe in Africa, I always say like, well, where did we get that knowledge about agriculture from?
Yeah.
And it's aliens.
Oh, right. Of course.
Like it's going to be the aliens came down, were like, check this out. And if it was Dr. Rita Louise, she'd be like, you know what? They changed our DNA and then told us how to do agriculture. Yeah. But he had a lot of good evidence about the similarity in the dwellings and how like...
He did.
And how it closed down, like the settlement was abandoned 3,600 years ago.
Yeah. So it was both the dwellings, and then he also had a lot of research on the languages and the similarities to the words and their origins and that type of thing that really linked up that, is quite convincing.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. Like, he's like, okay, so here's the Dogon word, here's the Egyptian word, here's the, the Gaelic word, or the Scottish language kind of word. And you're like, well, okay.
Yeah, they're very...
Like, you could see it. And some of it, like, he's taking, like, compound words and putting them together and everything. And sometimes you're like, okay, but it's all based in logic. It's all based in, like, okay, a certain kind of logic can lead you to these conclusions. And I think that's what I enjoyed about it, was that even if sometimes I didn't agree with his logic, I still found that I can still see where you're coming from. There's no point, like, you see those joke things where they have, like, number 1, do this. Number 2, do that. Number 3, blank. Number 4, profit.
Right.
Kind of thing. Like there was no point where there was a missing number 3 that didn't have the link between number 2 and number 4. And so that's why I enjoyed him and the mystery of Skara Brae. So Laird Scranton was interesting, and then 3 o'clock was one of my favorites.
Oh, one of my favorites too.
Yeah. Peter Robbins, who wrote a book, Left of the East Gate, about the Rendlesham UFO incident in the UK in 1980. So he wrote the book on the UK Roswell.
Right. And then he began to present a large amount of evidence proving that there was an alien landing there at that military base in the UK. And it was just it was very, very compelling.
I was like, yep, it's a UFO that landed there.
It's almost like you can't think of any other possible explanation for it. So that was great.
And I'd heard him on the radio before, and I'd heard people talk about the Rendlesham incident, and it's always like it's the English Roswell.
Yeah.
I
didn't know that much about it actually, so it's cool to.
Well, I tried to follow it, but I just never kind of got it before, and so it's really a fascinating incident of it's U.S. Military in the UK at an Air Force base, and the different people that saw and not just saw a light in the sky, but over 3 days, like saw something in the sky and then were right in front.
They saw a ship land, and then they saw creatures come out of it. And so this Peter Robbins was working closely with one of the soldiers who had a story to tell and had seen it and gave them the details, and they've been back there so many times to research it. And the research has been extensive. They were showing samples of the soil where the ship had landed versus, the surrounding areas. There's substantial differences in it. And
I love that.
There were just so many things and so many people that were there that had different accounts that all kind of lined up. Not kind of, like really lined up. So.
Yeah, and even if it wasn't a UFO, even if it was like a government thing, something happened.
Whatever it was something that we don't normally see here.
And the people are still alive. So unlike Roswell, and Roswell's a tough thing because, the 1940s, I know it's only, think about the distance to the 1940s. So think about 69 years since Roswell. 69, that's well within my parents' lifetime.
Right.
That's less than twice our lifetimes. So it's not that far away, but it seems like it
does feel like far away because the pictures and everything are so old looking from that, black and white pictures and
the technology is different. Because it's that post-war kind of thing.
Right.
And we were so secretive after the war, and you had to be so secretive during the war when they were doing atomic tests and everything in that area, in the deserts, and they were blowing up the atom bomb and everything. You can say that, well, was it a weather balloon? Was it all those kind of things? This to me seemed so much more backed up than the stuff I've heard about Roswell.
I agree.
And I was a Roswell true believer for years, kind of thing.
Yeah, and just hearing this man speak who's dedicated, what did he say, 35 years of his life he's been working on this?
I think the book came out in the late 80s. He started the research maybe the book came out in the 90s, but he started the research in the late 80s.
Yeah, it was very cool to hear.
And we're definitely gonna have him on to have a whole episode on the Rendlesham incident, and because it's 1980. First of all, it'd be fun to write a song in the popular UK music in 1980 in that vein. But second, just it makes me want to go there and check it out now. The Rendlesham Forest.
Yeah, totally.
And he gets into like weather experiments and stuff too. There was that thing at the end where they have this freak storm in 1988.
Yeah.
And it changes everything, and nobody can figure out where the storm
came from. It wipes out like a huge chunk of the forest. And it's just,
so it's like they were testing things there. There was weird stuff going on there, and like from weather control to alien gravity drives.
And then they had like all the weapons stored there as well. So that was part of the story.
Chemical and nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I recommend you got to check out his book, and we're having the show because he was a really interesting guy, and it felt like he was making a case. So it sounded like a lawyer making a case.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it was like.
Something weird happened. Mm-hmm. And then, so, if you had a lawyer making a case, I think the next speaker, who was he was the marquee name kind of thing when you think of alien abductees. The most famous one is Travis Walton.
Yes.
So if Peter Robbins was like a lawyer trying to make his case for weirdness happening in the UK, Travis Walton was the witness.
Right, but this is a different case, though. Just to make sure that's clear.
Sure, I was trying to like link them thematically.
I gotcha. I just didn't want people to be confused.
No, so Travis Walton. If you ever seen the movie Fire in the Sky, he was played by the actor D.B. Sweeney. Mike, the other guy, is played by Robert Patrick, who was on the X-Files, and he was the Terminator, the second Terminator. James Garner is in it. It's a great movie, and it's when I saw it like. Probably the weekend it came out.
And I don't think I've ever seen it actually, but I was
16 years old.
I've seen clips of it and stuff like that, but I'm absolutely going to watch it now because after hearing him speak and meeting him and talking to him and seeing his documentary, I'm really curious to see the Hollywoodized version of it.
So what they were doing is, Travis Walton had a presentation, or basically just a talk.
Yeah.
Like he just talked about things and answered people's questions, and then they showed his documentary, Travis. And that's a documentary it takes the Hollywood part out of it, but it goes back and has all this archival stuff from the 1970s when they were being interviewed and the newspapers
So we'll just give a really quick synopsis for the people who don't know his story. He was a logger in Arizona.
November 1975.
And he and his logging crew were up in the mountains in a really remote area working a long day, and it was starting to get dark. They saw a light. They drove over to check it out, what it was, because, normally when you're in the mountains in a remote area, that's you don't see other lights
at all.
So they went over there and they saw a ship hovering, and it had a beam that was pointing down at the earth. And
like if you picture it, you picture the flying saucer going around, and then the beam,
like a tractor beam.
Yeah, like seeing what's up.
And then they all kind of were shocked and amazed, of course. And Travis wanted to get a closer look, so he ran toward it, and he was hit by the energy or whatever, and it knocked him out.
Like lifted up. So like in the movie, they showed me like lifted up and thrown, and he made it sound like the beam really,
like it was a strike of light, like getting struck by lightning, basically.
Yeah, I think that's how he made it sound.
And his friends saw that happen, and then they ran to get help, and when they came back, he was gone.
They thought he was dead.
Yeah.
They totally thought
they
he was
didn't.
dead.
They were afraid to run, back toward the ship and stuff because they were worried that they would get hurt too. So they went to get help instead of going toward him. They went back and they reported it to the police. And these guys were honest, and they said what they saw.
The story.
And so there were 5 of them. So like they all saw the same thing, and they all, they did the polygraph tests on them, and they all passed. And it was just
they saw their friend get hit by an alien death ray, an alien death ray, and then they went back and reported it, and they all passed the polygraphs. What?
Yeah, and then so then he was gone. So everyone accused them of murdering him and hiding the body. And then 5 days later he appears. He wakes up like on the road, and he's got he didn't know how much time had passed, but he's got like 5 days worth of beard growing and
stubble.
Yeah. And so anyway, the whole thing is that those guys witnessed this, and he's got some memories from being in the ship and stuff. We can save that for another episode. But the whole thing that those guys saw it happen, they reported it to the police what they actually saw. They
never changed their story.
Right. And it's 40 years later, and they still nobody has changed their story. And Travis is just like the most down to earth,
like a regular dude.
Seriously. I mean, I was so impressed to hear him speak, and he also just he just told us the facts. He's like, this is exactly what I remember, and here's what people said they saw. Here's what I saw. Here's what I remember when I woke up. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was like, there's no reason for someone to make up a story like that, because he was saying how, it was kind of sad at the end. He said that he still wishes it had never happened.
It didn't affect his life in a super positive way.
No, people, he was like
ridiculed and of course called crazy, or saying that he made it all up or for profit or whatever.
Yeah. So it's just a really sad story of, what happened to him after the fact, and the way the people in the town treated him, and the police and everybody, just, nobody believed him. So.
No, and it doesn't come out great.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he said 40 years of practice, but you can just go up there and talk to him. He's want to talk about it. Super nice, super just humble. He doesn't sensationalize it. He talks about the parts he can remember. And when you ask him some more salacious questions, when you're trying to say things like, what they do to you, what do you remember? And he's
like, what was the ship? What did it look like inside? Like, tell us some details.
And so after the movie, we all just hung out at the Masonic Lodge and had some drinks and talked and everything. And so
that was so cool.
Right. Just all night, and we're sitting there talking, and I could just ask Travis, hey man, and I talked about some different theories and things like that. And he's like, well, maybe, but I tell you, I can only talk about the things that I can document.
That I know are true,
that I know I remember. When I was asking him about, have you had dreams about things that you maybe remember something different because of your dreams, or have things come to you in flashes? Mm-hmm. In Communion, which is the book by Whitley Strieber about alien abduction, which is kind of my introduction to alien abduction.
Yeah.
In Communion, he talks about seeing animals, owls, set off the gray alien memories for him. So I was kind of asking him about that. I was probing Travis Walton.
Oh gosh. But
just a nice guy.
Oh yeah, so great. And what I really appreciated about his talk was he also explained how he's come to terms with it over the course of his life, So through the 4 decades that have passed, initially he was saying how obviously it was traumatic, and you feel violated, and you feel why did this happen to me, and it's my fault because I went running at the beam, and then he said that he's come to accept it more as not like they were trying to hurt him, but he accidentally got in the beam, and they wanted to make him better.
They saved him.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be like they came and they're exploring Earth or whatever and hurt a person.
It's like you're driving and you ran over a dog, and then you take the dog to the vet.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what he thinks of it now. But that took him years to come to the fact that they weren't doing some kind of diabolical experimentation, but that they tried to bring him back to life, because they did drop him off.
Right. Yeah. And he also describes it as, I choose to think of it this way, and it gives him some peace of mind to not, because how horrible it would it be to think every day oh God, they came after me and tried to kill me,
they could come
like,
again. Sure.
right. So I thought that was really cool. That was a neat human way of dealing with the experience.
Mm-hmm. Just a very reasonable person and stuff. And it was just fun to be able to just talk and hang out.
He's a great guy. And he's a musician too.
Right. And he had his guitar out and stuff like that. And he gets backed up by his kids.
Yeah.
And they're doing a paranormal and music
That's so cool.
festival in Laughlin, Nevada. So
good for him. And it's nice that we have a little common thread there.
yeah, they were musicians too. So anyway, that was just really fun. And the movie was a highlight for me. And getting
the
to meet him.
documentary was excellent.
Yeah. And we'll be talking about that again. And we'll go into depth with the producer and stuff. And because here's the thing for me, 40 years, nobody's broke character.
Right.
These guys are getting into their elderly ages. So if these guys are 70 years old or approaching 70, then somebody offers you, tell the truth.
Yeah.
Tell the truth, and I'll give you $50,000. We'll make a special on the Sci-Fi Channel. The truth about Travis Walt. The truth about Fire in the Sky.
To try to get them to just crack.
Right. And I'm sure
Or
they've
even
been
make up a story. Even just lie and say, this didn't happen,
Mm-hmm.
But no, they're all
Sticking to
the story.
So, hey, I believe them.
I do too. I mean, I believe what they reported. I really do.
Was it aliens? I don't know. Was he taken? He was taken by somebody.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it might have been alien beings.
It was very convincing.
So that was Friday night, which I thought was really fun. And we had too good of a time on Friday night, so we came in a little late on Saturday.
Yeah, and I had work to do on Saturday, so unfortunately I missed some of the panels. So you'll have to.
I'll let you know what's up.
Summarize. Okay, cool.
First person was Paranormal Sarah Soderlund. She's a Twin Cities based researcher.
Right.
A lot of the work she does is with psychopathy.
Cool.
Okay, so psychopaths, and that's a lot of the questions she was answering.
Mm-hmm.
And because the thing is, sociopaths, psychopaths, people that don't feel a kind of empathy, feelings, people that can make business decisions because they don't care as much about the human element.
Right.
We tend to think of a psycho like a Michael Myers type character or something, like he's just going to cut you up.
Yeah.
But what if somebody just doesn't feel the same as you? Mm-hmm. They just don't have those same feelings. Like, we think somebody losing their job, oh my God, doesn't that person have a heart?
It's terrible. Yeah.
So think of a CEO of an organization. Sometimes they have to be a psychopath because they have, and a sociopath, because they have to do things like, doesn't that person have a heart? It's like, no, not the same way you do. And that's the idea. So she kind of brought that up, and that's what a lot of people were asking her questions about. Mm-hmm. But I know she does some cool paranormal research too. So I've been following Paranormal Sarah for a while, and she was at the Chicago convention.
Oh, okay, right.
I caught her talking about it, and I totally think she's going to be in Milwaukee this year at the Milwaukee Paranormal Conference.
Great.
So we'll be able to catch up with her there and do more stuff. Her Twitter is at Paranormal Sarah, and we'll put links to all the people that we talk about today so that you can check them out. The after lunch guy was named Scott Wolter. A lot of his research had to do with this thing, like the Minnesota runestone, like Kensington runestone they found in a certain area in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And he's been on America Uncovered, which is like a History Channel kind of show. And
he used to be a football player.
Yes. So he's an interesting guy, had a lot of cool things to say. But his research was really into this runestone and how it relates to the Norsemen, the Vikings and stuff like that. Like, we think of them, Leif Erikson and stuff, may have hit Greenland in, what if the Vikings made it
all the way over here
to Minnesota, all the way halfway to Minnesota in the 13th century.
How did he find the runestone?
Well, it was found in 1898.
Oh, so okay.
He did but
he found the information about it. And
and so
got really.
He's a forensic geologist.
Okay, I see.
So he was brought in to the Pentagon on September 11th.
Wow.
Not the day, but to help find, the plane, where did it hit, all that kind of things. And so he was working as a forensic geologist when he discovered about that runestone. And so he wanted to go back and find out, okay, what time period is it from? Where is the stone from? Things like that. And he traced it back a long time. And he brought in Freemasonry too, and a lot, connected the,
there it is again.
Yeah. He's connecting the dots to the long history of Freemasonry and the Knights Templar, and maybe it's the same kind of thing here, or maybe these guys were Knights Templar that came. And so he was an interesting character. And some of it was above my head because the Freemasonry talk, I was like, oh, okay, I don't really, I don't know too much about it, but good speaker, well researched, and a lot of interesting ideas. So we think about the the Norsemen might have been here a lot longer than we think they could have been. And I think that's cool. So the Minnesota Vikings, I mean, they really might, like, they might be for real.
More deeply rooted than we expected.
Next guy was Micah Hanks, and he has a podcast called The Gralien Report.
Right.
And he went into secret societies. And so that was fun too, because he talked about like the Skull and Bones fraternity that they have at Yale. George W. Bush was a Skull and Bones. George A. Herbert Walker Bush was a Skull and Bones.
Movie? There was a movie about that.
Well, there was a movie called like The Skulls. I can't remember, but it had Pacey in it from Dawson's Creek. And like it was a secret fraternity at a university. But the Skull and Bones is all. I mean, John Kerry was it too. So you have two guys running for president in 2004 who both went to Yale, who were both part of this secret fraternity, who were both like,
yeah.
You know, what does that tell you? Right. There's a real difference between the political parties, isn't there?
Right. Yeah.
So, but you would go to that, how those secret societies eventually would grow. Like people start getting together in Washington think tanks. You know, so the Council on Foreign Relations. And there was other think tanks that he talked about where a lot of the people who had joined that secret society eventually went on to become part of these think tanks that are affecting our government, our policies, things like that. Right. So the Council on Foreign Relations is formed by a bunch of people who were from like the Skull and Bones Society. One thing that Peter Robbins talked about, and Micah connected this in his conversation, in his presentation, is that Peter Robbins talked about the Foreign Affairs magazine, which is put out by the Council of Foreign Relations. And he talked about the magazine, and that was where the phrase Cold War started.
Oh, right.
So he talked about that Cold War. So, and the Cold War was our policy for 40 years.
Right.
You know, so do people in secret societies rule the world? Well, secret society, think tank, policy, Cold War.
There you go.
So that was just a good way to link
profit.
That. Yeah. For profit. So he had a really strong presentation. Micah Hanks is a great presenter. You know, the Gralien Report was always a really interesting
And a sharp
podcast.
dresser.
He is a sharp dresser. Right. Oh, and I loved it too. We'll put the picture up. So Friday he shows up dressed like the 10th Doctor, David Tennant. Saturday he shows up dressed like the 12th Doctor, Peter Capaldi. And yesterday, I feel like it was the first Doctor, William Hartnell. But anyway, sharp dresser, nice guy, also a musician.
Yeah.
And I'd love to talk to him more because
Definitely.
he has a ton of things. And secret societies I always think are interesting. And he didn't have too many stretches. You know, he didn't talk.
Okay.
It wasn't Dan Brown, the Masons rule the world.
Yeah.
It was pretty straightforward because these guys, and a lot of them are, you know, rich white men, these wealthy rich men, they kind of get together and they talk about things. So naturally, you go from the Ivy League. If you go into Washington or you go into Wall Street, you go into business, now you're rich and you can start changing things.
Right.
And so it wasn't far out. It was just kind of like conspiracies are, you know, we tend to say like we use it in a negative way.
Yeah.
But conspiracies are just people getting together and making decisions and working together towards a common goal.
And then hiding it from everyone else.
Right. And so the next speaker after that was a UFO researcher by the name of Richard Dolan. And he's the guy, when we first saw him, I'm like, hey, is that Wayne Coyne from the Flaming Lips? He looks like the guy from the Flaming Lips.
Oh, yeah, and he was interviewed in the Travis Walton documentary.
And he gets into more of the secret societies. He gets into more of the agenda.
Cool.
So Richard Dolan, interesting guy. So his goes more into, kind of starts where Micah left off at secret societies, but he goes far out.
Okay.
You know, he's like, in his research, he thinks that we haven't visited. The government is covering it up.
Sure.
And disclosure. Why don't we have UFO disclosure? And we've talked about disclosure before, like why doesn't the government just tell us?
Yeah.
And he goes into the reasons why the government wouldn't tell us.
Okay.
You know, the reasons of control, you know, they're going towards more a transnational government where less sovereignty.
Yeah.
And these people might not have bad intentions because they think this might be the way for humanity to go forward without war, without...
Right, because, I mean, if we have to communicate with them, if we have to, like, work out some kind of deal here, we want to work as a planet, not as one of the countries on the planet.
Well, you know, and also the idea, some of the things he talks about is, it goes back to Independence Day.
Yeah.
Right, so Independence Day when Bill Pullman makes the speech, you know, he's like, he said, we're not citizens of countries anymore, we're citizens of Earth. And this is
exactly.
And it just happened to fall on the American Independence Day in the movie, which is kind of cheesy. And we'll do a whole Independence Day thing when the sequel comes out later this summer. which I'm
I can't
Independence
wait.
Day.
It looks so cool.
Of course, I'm going to see it. Like, but so it gets to that. Would people see themselves as citizens of the United States anymore? Would they see
Right.
themselves as citizens of the world?
Yeah.
Because no longer are we. I mean, now we're a state
Yeah.
in a broader coalition, and now the Earth is something where there's other planets out there that we have to contend with.
Right.
So are we going to fight each other over something stupid when there's aliens to deal with?
Let's hope not.
And so, I mean, even Ronald Reagan said that, though. You know, he said that for the UN, and people point to that as like maybe he was
knew
hinting
something.
at disclosure. Ronnie was hinting at disclosure, and people used to call him Ronnie Ray Gun because
That's right,
of his
yeah.
build up, because he built up the defense so much. But he even says that, and he talks about how, you know, if we had an alien threat, people would no longer consider themselves citizens of the world.
Yeah.
And so but that's one of the reasons that they don't want to disclose.
Right.
Because how do you control people?
Yeah.
Richard Dolan, interesting guy, fun. He played some Flaming Lip songs. They were great.
Nice.
No, he didn't. But
He did have that Wayne Coyne kind of look.
yeah, but his presentation was just really sharp, and
Yeah.
I like to see that. Okay, so like, what's the long game? And it's all theories, and he'll admit that. You know,
Well, right, of course, because what do you have to work on?
he doesn't promise you that any of this is the absolute truth and stuff, but he goes into
You have to start with a hypothesis.
like, what's the long game for this?
Yeah.
And so that's where Richard Dolan kind of went, and I enjoyed that. Anyway, so then when you got back from getting your work done, then you came and we played some
It was
music for the
time to play.
yeah, and then we got to play some music for the cocktail party,
Yeah.
and that was a real delight.
That
Just-
was extremely fun. We played some of our "See You on the Other Side" songs.
yes, a lot of "See You on the Other Side" songs we wrote for this podcast specifically.
Yeah.
And we got to play them acoustic for the people at the party, and that was
it was super fun,
yeah, that was super fun.
and everybody was very
they're almost too nice.
warm and welcoming,
Like,
and
I'm like,
they
they're
liked
gonna
our music.
they're gonna abduct us.
Yeah.
I'm like, why are you being so nice? Like, what's your plan?
Yeah, there's like a trap door in the
But
lodge.
But then everybody's just talking about weird stuff at dinner, which
awesome.
which was fun. You
It
know?
was. Yeah, we met lots of great new friends there, and it was fun because you'd see these people every day for 4 days. So by the time it was time to leave, I was like, oh man, we got to leave our friends now.
Right, 'cause
I like these people.
It's like that, you know, it's that accelerated friendship that you
Totally,
get, like
yeah.
that we get when we go
Through
play somewhere.
bonding with, yeah.
And you're talking about so many interesting things, and
And people are freer to share things that they're not sure about because they don't, you know, it's a judgment free zone. It really is. Like people are a lot more open.
I think because of the haunted tours that I'm involved in. Oh, St. Paul launched on Friday.
Yeah.
Went well.
Yay.
We also had a long segment on the Madison News on.
Yes.
So anyway, but because of that haunted tour stuff, I always feel like it's always a judgment-free zone. And because
Right,
we do
of
the
course.
podcast, it's
Yeah.
always a judgment-free zone around us.
We want to hear that stuff. Like we love it when people share stories with us and things like that.
But I think when you had people saying, you know, they were just like, man, it's nice to be in a place where we can talk about this without the fear
Yeah.
of other people judging us. You're just like, well, that damn right, man. That's a
Exactly.
good, that's a good
No,
feeling.
I liked that a lot too.
And it was nice to be able to share that and hear people's stories and just be able to talk about some out there things without somebody looking at you like what's your agenda? Like, no, my agenda is to talk about aliens, man.
yeah,
That's
I
it.
just want to hear more. I want to hear what other people think.
That's it.
I mean,
So that was a real pleasure, and we had a lot of fun. And then Saturday night we go to bed early because we're exhausted.
gosh, everybody at the thing it's just like every convention or conference, like, because you're going the whole day.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're not listening to something intense, you're talking to people. It's great, but
Right.
it's really
So
exhausting.
that we hit the wall, like 11 o'clock or something. I was like, okay, we hit the wall. But then the next day, interesting guy started out, Dan Madsen, who was the president of the Star Trek fan
Yes, that
club.
was cool. And that was something different from anything else over the weekend too. So he had a neat story to tell.
He did. So he's a little person, and he was really influenced by seeing an episode of Star Trek called Plato's Stepchildren. Captain Kirk says to another little person in the episode, where I come from, your color, size, shape doesn't matter. And he said that influenced him, made him love Star Trek, made him love that idea of that universe. And he eventually became the editor of like the Star Trek Communicator magazine, got to meet Gene Roddenberry, got all
Yeah.
this access to Star Trek. And at the same time, because of his work was so good in Star Trek, George Lucas wanted him for Star Wars too, because he's a big Star Wars fan.
Yep.
So he worked in the Star Wars magazine and even got a cameo in episode
so
1.
cool. So he actually got attention of the guys
Yeah,
that produced
and-
these movies, and
And he just has this, he's just got a compelling story of how that message from Star Trek of hope and inclusion and diversity in the future and stuff like that.
Changed his life.
Yeah, he's changed his life. And it set a career course for him to be able to be involved in these things.
And to impact other people as well.
In a positive way. Yeah. So his story,
It's so cool.
you know, and he talks about being interviewed by William Shatner and being able to tell William, you know, everybody thinks that William Shatner, like all the stories from the set and stuff like that, just like, you know, he's a classic Hollywood star, has this ego, has this, you know, and William Shatner wrote the book Get a Life, which when he based on a Saturday Night Live skit where he, you know, he's saying get a life to these people at a Star Trek convention. But he eventually came to terms with his Star Trek fame, and you know, because like TV and sci-fi and everything, like now we're in the Comic-Con.
It's cool now.
You know, like
It's
Robert
accepted.
Downey, like a great thespian, like Robert Downey Jr. was always considered a great actor from a Hollywood family. His father was a director and everything, and like a thespian, like a serious thespian, even like before his drug problem. But when he came out, you know, but he's the face of like Marvel Comics, like, and so all these great actors now will appear. You know, William Hurt, Academy Award nominee and stuff like that, is in the Avengers and or in this new Captain America Civil War movie. Like all these actors will do these things now and be in genre films and be in sci-fi and things. But when you took an actor like Charlton Heston being in Planet of the Apes or Omega Man or things like that in the 70s, they're like, well,
It's a joke.
Chuck is slumming.
Yeah. No, it wasn't. And it wasn't cool to like, if you liked Star Trek, you didn't necessarily brag about it. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. And it just has changed.
Yeah, and now it's totally
I mean, we did an episode with Dr. Rebecca Housel called like The Rise of the Geeks or whatever. And it really, and that everything's changed. So this Dan Madsen is there, the hard times, like my youth.
Yeah.
No, but you think about this. And so his story of that is just really compelling. And I even found out, I even teared up a little bit.
Yeah, me too.
You know, I was like, okay, that's pretty beautiful. And so, nice guy, cool story.
Mm-hmm.
And after him was something else that was interesting.
Very.
Jeffrey Doherty, the Christian whistleblower. And before we knew him, it's funny because we were looking at him. He looks like Jeff Bridges a little bit. So we were like, oh man. Before we met him, we're like, who's the Big Lebowski? You know, and he was such a interesting guy. And then he looks like Jeff Bridges.
Yeah, and he was there the whole weekend at all the different presentations also, and he'd be talking to him in between panels. So we were on a first name basis by the time.
Right, and he's asking questions, he's participating, and he's somebody that used to be a preacher.
Yes, for 20 years, he said.
And then turns around and is doing research into the literal translation of the Bible, and then starts having a different
perspective
on it. And I mean, he goes in to the literal translation of the Bible and the perspective from, okay, here's the King James Version that makes it sound, you know, like, oh, when Jesus was crucified, the sky just went dark. The literal translation is something came in the sky and a shadow was cast a huge shadow over the city. Like what? And
yeah, so he goes back to the original,
like the Greek and Aramaic,
and he re-examines the language and everything and starts pointing out areas where there's room for a different interpretation of what happened. The literal events.
So they talk about when Mary is impregnated by, the Virgin Mary is impregnated by God. And so in like the King James Version, it's just like, well, you're going to have the Son of God in you and it's going to be, but in the original translation, it's like it doesn't say baby, it doesn't say person.
Yeah.
It says there's a thing inside you.
Yeah.
And we hit some fun slides with the gray alien instead of Jesus.
And very dynamic speaker.
Oh man, what a great speech.
Yeah.
But also, it reminds me of this movie. There's a movie called Prince of Darkness by John Carpenter. And it says that Satan and Jesus are aliens. Like there's this alien energy that's come to Earth kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's the theme of the movie Prince of Darkness. And, he kind of brings that up. He doesn't say that Jesus is an alien or anything.
No, he doesn't. And he even, right at the very beginning, he said, I'm just going to present some information. And, he emphasized many times, I just want you to know you can look at it this way or you can look at it this way. And which one is going to be better for you? Which one is going to bring you more peace? And it's your choice to follow that belief. So.
And his book is The Christian Whistleblower. And I'd love to talk to him sometime where he can get in more depth on that. But Jeffrey Doherty, The Christian Whistleblower, And yeah, you could tell I'm the old preacher. And he goes into some of that, like he gives you the hallelujah and the amen and stuff like that. But it's from a different perspective. And you know what? I can see where a lot of people, if it weren't at a thing like this, when you're saying like something, we make fun of the Scientologists, like, oh, they believe in aliens. Well, but people take the Pope seriously, and he believes in a virgin birth, and he believes in, and so this guy's got a different perspective, and he's like, I'm not saying it was an alien, but I'm saying is there might be people who want you to think that, or that, that the text is
the original
different
text, like
than what we thought.
What were they actually trying to say before someone else got a hold of it and made this warmed over version of it?
Right. And he says that he really believes in the teachings of who he says Yeshua, the name for Jesus, or what we call Jesus. And he goes, I really believe in those teachings, but it's his perspective is different than the traditional church.
Yeah. And it was cool because just to hear that from someone who had been a preacher and who has spent so much time researching the scriptures. And I mean, it was just,
right. Well, he said he spent something like 100,000 hours reading.
Crazy amounts of time.
Right. And I read the Bible for 5 minutes in a hotel room. I fall asleep. What I thought was interesting, there was nothing particularly anti-Christian in the entire, but it was showing Christianity from different perspectives.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was the ability to talk about things where you could say that, like, when Ilan Maladikit comes out and says things like, well, the historical basis of Israel, like, it didn't really start till the 2nd or 3rd century BC. That kind of thing would, like, you can't say that. All of a sudden that conversation becomes politically charged.
Right.
Like, what are you saying about modern day Israel?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not talking about modern day Israel. I'm talking about the 3rd century.
Yeah.
And we have to talk about the historical record. Like, things become politically charged. If somebody, starts saying, well, the agenda of Christianity, now we got to go, like, okay, so is he saying an anti-Catholic thing? Is he saying an anti-papal thing? It's nice to be able to discuss those things. Everybody has their viewpoints open, and nothing is politically charged.
Right.
I even read, like, Richard Dolan's talking about something, and he's like, yeah, even the only political thing I thought he said, because he's showing pictures of, like, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and stuff, and saying how they were, he talks about the Bilderberg, them going to the Bilderbergs and things like that, and how interesting sometimes that the presidential candidates will meet at these, they'll have these meetings and stuff like that, and all of a sudden they'll be the presidential candidates, and they think the only thing is, he's like, well, I do have a Bernie Sanders sign in my yard.
Nice.
And so that was the only thing close to a political statement I heard the entire weekend.
Nice.
Right, which is really nice, especially in an election year. And I wasn't even offended by that because, he just told us about the alien agenda.
Yeah.
Obviously
Right.
he's willing to be, to go out there on the limb. And I thought that was neat, that you could have an entire weekend where people say very provocative things and no one, like, gets mad.
Yeah,
no one takes it. No one gets hurt. They just say, okay, let's discuss this.
Yeah.
Like, what are the points here? Like, I might believe this, something different than you. And I just wish all conversations could be like that.
I agree. And I just have to mention too that the main, like, one of the main MC, I guess I'd call it, Scotty Roberts.
Yes.
He was also
He's awesome.
very great, because he was coming in, he'd introduce, each of the speakers, and then he would, during the panels, he was asking questions and stuff like that. So I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned that he really, like, he was the glue for the whole conference. And it was wonderful to meet him, and he was just a really cool guy, talking to him, and just very welcoming. And
he didn't get much of a chance to present, like, his adventure, because he does, like, adventures, like, he goes,
the Egyptian thing.
and he's done a lot of research into alternative history, but he's the glue that connects the whole thing together. Like,
so it was cool to. He did a great job.
It is his baby, and on Friday night when we were all, like, partying a little bit after, like, really got to spend time with him and ask him questions and things, and he, like, a real life Indiana Jones type character, like him and John Ward, and they go adventures, they explore this kind of stuff. They print a magazine, Intrepid magazine was their thing,
and we're gonna have him on the show, hopefully.
Absolutely. Like, to me, that's living the dream.
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
Come on, you guys are living the dream. And so
here.
What a wonderful MC, and just nicest guy in the world, which is sometimes when you're under a lot of pressure, it's really easy to be a jerk or be dismissive or anything. Yeah. And none of that.
And he was there the whole time. Like, he didn't leave. He was there for all the after parties, all the,
warm and
in
welcome.
betweens. Yeah.
Totally. So I think that atmosphere made it really special. And so if they do another Paradigm Symposium, I hope they do. If you are into this stuff at all, like, the thing is, there were a few people from Wisconsin, a few people from Minnesota.
Yeah.
But a lot of other people we met, which
from other states.
Everybody came from across the country. Like, I've been here before.
It's really cool.
And this is the best one. Like, there was a girl I was talking to the last day And what does she say? She's like, well, I've been to a bunch of other paranormal events, and when I came here, like this one was about science, like people doing their best to prove their point in a nonsense, in the most realistic manner possible, and everybody here is really serious about it. And that's how I felt too. I was like, wow, like everybody here is serious about being weird.
Each person was clearly devoted, their life to the topic they were talking about. So it's really, really cool to see.
I'd say it's really an exceptional event. So if they do it again, I would recommend you guys do that. We'll have links and everything. Yeah, I would go again, talk, and just to hear more, like, now that I got the basics of all these people, I want to get to the 201 level. I want to hear the advanced. So
we'll be following up with all these.
Yep. So definitely it was an inspiration for a lot of podcasts to come, and songwriting and things like that. And speaking of inspiration,
yes,
the song this week isn't something we wrote,
right?
But we did a cover in a video a couple years ago, and in the video we took footage, like we use footage from Fire in the Sky.
Yeah.
And it's about alien abduction.
Right.
Is this particular song by the Killers called Spaceman. And we kind of made our own version of it, made a video of it.
Seems appropriate.
Getting to meet Travis Walton for the first time, when that was, that was main inspiration of the video and everything. We were like, well, we got to make this the song today. So this is Sunspot version of the Killers, Spaceman.
Started with a low light. Next thing I know, they ripped me from my bed, and then they took my blood type. They left a strange impression in my head. You know that I was hoping that I could leave this star-crossed
thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
The magic spell is going to the gym and eating right. Okay.